Ransomware these days is very well organized. The attacker is not simply delivering a software payload to encrypt the customer's data, but instead they're taking an active role in that process. For example, let's say that a ransomware attacker has gained access to the business network using phishing. This is the most common way in, and it's still a method by which many businesses don't fully protect against. So our attacker has gained access to the business network, and they can start interrogating that network to learn how the business runs. So they understand that the business uses Oracle as their company database. They use Dynamics as their accounting system. They use Office 365. They're using VMware as their primary hypervisor. And let's say that they're using Veeam as their backup solution. This represents a fairly common setup for many SME organizations. But we also have to think about the ransomware attacker as an organization, as they're going to function like one. They're going to project manage this attack. And that means that they're going to bring in specialists for each of these areas. They're going to bring in Oracle experts who specialize in compromising Oracle and RMAN systems. There'll be a second team who are experts in exploiting Dynamics. There'll be a third team who understand Active Directory and Azure Active Directory, so they can not only gain access to the local authentication systems, but they can also gain access to the data in Office 365. And finally, there'll be a team that are Veeam experts who understand the nuances on how Veeam works, but are also familiar with working around ransomware protection features, such as immutable repositories. So if we consider the attacker as a fully formed organization with huge resources and expertise at their disposal, then certainly they have an advantage, and it's not surprising that so many businesses are forced to pay the ransom. I would certainly like to think that a lot of customers do have a ransomware response plan. But I also think that businesses maybe look at that in a fairly simplistic way. I've spoken to a lot of IT teams who believe that their backups are sufficient protection for ransomware, or storing their data in SaaS services such as Office 365 is somehow ransomware proof. So yes, many businesses tick the box, say yes, I've got a ransomware response plan, but simply backing your data up, keeping it in another site, and having Office 365 is not a response plan. There's a lot more to protecting your business. There is this concept these days of a layered defense, and a lot of businesses find that daunting, maybe don't look too deeply into it because they're concerned that it's going to be quite expensive. But it's possible to significantly improve your protection level without actually a huge expense. Anti-phishing is a good example. Phishing is still the most common attack vector for ransomware, and many businesses can quite easily defend against that with anti-phishing services that won't break the bank. So I would urge businesses to look at a layered approach in a little bit more detail and ensure they are covering off the protection they need for their business. So what's the alternative to paying the ransom? I'm not sure there is an alternative to paying. I think once you have been attacked and they have your data encrypted, they have probably destroyed your backups, almost certainly, in fact, and they've essentially compromised your network to such an extent that it's very difficult for you to actually gain access to your network, let alone your data. I think in that situation, by then, you have very little alternative other than to pay the ransom. I think this is very much like disaster recovery, in the fact that if you haven't already got a DR plan in place and there is a fire and you lose your entire network and all of your systems and all of your backups, then there is no method of recovery. The point is you needed to have a DR plan in place. We do need to think about these things before they happen rather than trying to recover from them afterwards. So there's little alternative to pay the ransom once you get attacked by ransomware. And I think that's a very important question for the business. A lot of the time, this is considered to be an IT issue. And I don't believe that this is an IT issue in exactly the same way that disaster recovery is considered to be an IT issue. I think the technical elements of performing it are related to IT, but I think the business has to decide whether it feels that the level of investment required to provide this protection. And it's exactly the same with ransomware. The business needs to decide how it would survive in the event that a ransomware attack struck and was successful. And on that basis, then the business can then utilize that as a method of working out budgets and investments to make sure that that doesn't happen. Talking of DR though, I have had a number of customers sort of suggest that they're going to use their DR plan as their recovery for ransomware. And I'm not sure that works either. I think there's this concept with disaster recovery whereby really DR data needs to be your most up-to-date data. You don't want to be recovering to a month ago. You want to be recovering to yesterday, or at the worst, the day before. You know, you're using a day's worth of data for a business from a DR perspective is not good, but it's probably acceptable. Ideally, you want to lose minutes or a couple of hours, but you certainly don't want to lose days worth of data. So from a ransomware perspective, what that means is that all of the data at your DR site is also infected with the same ransomware attack that your primary site was. And your ransomware attacker will have placed backdoors, will have placed exploits inside those systems to allow them to get back in again in the event that they get kicked out of the primary network. Remember, they've been on your network for some time before this, the actual ransomware attack is launched, many months in places. So they know they probably even know where your DR environment is and its IP network. So using DR is not a protection from ransomware either. Really, you do have to think about this from the point of view of we've got to be preemptive. We've got to talk to the business about how this is structured, and we need to get the business to say, well, yes, we are prepared to invest in this tier of protection, to make sure that if we are attacked, or if someone attempts to attack us, we have the level of protection that we need to make sure that we can fend them off. So is there an alternative to paying the ransom? Yeah, think ahead. That's really it.